action. Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon with the Walter Russell Secret of Light group. Today, we are going to continue our discussion of Alice Bailey's A Treatise on White Magic. We are on Rule 8. This is part 2 of Rule 8. We are at the halfway point. For those of you who are just catching this one and haven't caught any of the previous discussions, they are all posted on YouTube also. And we covered part 1 of Rule 8, and we are going to cover the last part of it just as a review at the beginning of this discussion. But first, as we always do, we're going to look at the collage that I put together for this time, for this Rule 8 second part, which is called Part 2, Rule 8, the cycle, ebb and flow. So we're going to talk about the ebb and flow of our existence in the material world and also in our soul selves, and the cycle of life, not only on the earth, but also in the spiritual realms, as discussed by Alice Bailey, who was a adept at Theosophy and brought the work of Helena Blavatsky forward into a new era where she expanded upon the work of Helen Blavatsky's secret doctrine, and also on other aspects, and brought them into more of a modern age of the 1940s and 50s. With that, we're going to look at this collage. So let's first read the Rule 8 again. So Rule 8 is the Agnosurians respond to the sound. The waters ebb and flow. Let the magician guard himself from drowning at the point where land and water meet. The midway spot, which is neither dry nor wet, must provide the standing place whereon his feet are set. When water, land, and air meet, there is the place for magic to be wrought. So within this, this is the guiding rule for this chapter. And as we talk about the ebb and flow, we're going to discuss different aspects of the ebb and flow of the human condition and also of the human consciousness, which are two distinct aspects of Bailey's work, where she has what she would call white magic, which is magic from the soul, and black magic, which is magic from the personality. So within Theosophy, they see the human as two distinct types. One, the personality, which is the avatar that has the bones, which is, as the Chinese would say, is the sheath of food that we see. So we have an energy body that is clothed with nutrients, that is our sheath. And then we have our soul body, or our higher self, which is our consciousness that we need to bring down into the physical plane within our conscious body in order to practice white magic, as Bailey talks about. And so within this concept of the Treatise on White Magic, we are trying to help people attain their soul selves. This is a path. It's not the only path, but it's one that we're looking at, as we discussed earlier in our group. As mankind changes, as the human condition changes, as our norms and culture change, these all have effect on ourselves, on our personality, and our soul self has to digest and transmute those energies into a new consciousness that we will bring forth into the new age. As we go into the age of Aquarius, which is the age of the air, we will see that through the Lemurian, Atlantean, and our current age, our bodies have changed, our consciousness have changed, and our concepts have changed, and our journeys have changed also, of how our souls relate to the different levels of existence, or planes of nature, as Ibrahim Kareem calls them in biogeometry, how we relate to those and how we explore those to create our current selves. So as we look at this collage, the first thing I'd like you to concentrate on is this picture in the upper left-hand corner. This is really the way that modern materialists look at the world as our journey. This is up here, and we can see so what we see here is like the journey of man. So this is how a materialist sees the world. This is kind of, when Russell talks about Newton only seeing the apple fall to the ground, he didn't see it, dissolve and go back into cosmic space. He only saw, say, the baby beginning here with the form of life, getting into an adult, reaching middle age, descending back into death. There is no, within this picture, there is no idea of where the soul goes and how the soul communes with these other planes and its journey that it takes, which is the consciousness. This is really only a depiction of the body, but it is a depiction of the phases that we may go through as we grow and begin to mature into a being. And in each of these stages, we actually will change our consciousness, we'll change our awareness, and we'll change how we view and perceive the world. We'll have different concerns, different ideas, and the culture will change. All these things will affect us. The energies of the cosmos will change. The position of the stars will change. All these things will have effect on this physical body. Down here, we see things coming from the water. This is the Darwinian idea that we came from the oceans, and we will, progress into man, and we'll go back into the ocean. So this is really more of a depiction of the journey of man as seen by a materialist. They don't really see anything past the death. Over here, we actually see the transmutation of the soul. So within Theosophy, they say that the soul goes through different incarnations in different planes. We travel through these planes before we return back to the earth. So this is the idea within Theosophy, that the soul would take off from this point of death, go through transmutations, go through journeys, and then return back into life with an incarnation on the earth. Here we kind of see what we call the pulse that we were talking about earlier also. This pulse, the heartbeat, that has that rhythm, has that time, has that musical nature that we all go through. There's a pulse that Walter Russell also talks about, this divine pulse within the world. Down here we see a theosophical concept of this 7 rays. And you see in both of these, we both have this infinity symbol, the symbol of the 8, which works as a magician's. This is how the Theosophists see the 7 rays. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 7 rays today, because they're mentioned in this. And we're going to talk a little bit about ray 1, but we're also going to talk more about the 7 rays. As we see here, this is kind of a depiction of the different cycles of man with these different ages. And these different ages correspond to different materials, different concepts. It also relates back to the David's vision of the man, the head of gold, the breastplate of silver, the torso of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. But the interpretation of that was not really based on this overall cycle or cyclical concept in man and man's existence. It was more finite, because within a lot of the teachings of the current Christian church, they end at death. So the idea is the cycle continues, that we live in cycles, not circles. And it's very important to understand these cycles. The next thing we're going to talk about in this discussion is the idea of the fire of the inside the head. And that really comes from the eye of Ra, which is inside our head, which is the hypothalamus, the pituitary, as it connects to the crown. And we're going to talk about how that's done within Theosophy, within Bailey's work, to actually ignite this fire in the head, to connect these two aspects of ourselves, so that we can actually begin to understand and connect with divine purpose, with our earthly self, that we can actually begin to see divine purpose. And again, this is just kind of a picture of the adept that has this fire in the head and is beginning to on her journey of enlightenment, or this higher purpose and soul self. So any comments or discussion about what we've talked about to this point? Go ahead, Cosmic. You're muted.
Yeah, I just want to bring my toy in here, right?
Okay.
In terms of what that graphic in the upper left really is all talking about, right? Because that 0 is in the center point. And what you're looking at, these are numbers, right? Because those ages where these transitions happen, those are numbers that transfers happen. And that's really what this is all talking about, is cycles inside of cycles. Is there's cycles happening inside of here, right? That those numbers are happening inside here in those transition points, but it's all about the center informing the circumference, as a circumference informs the center, is the key to everything that that this torus represents, and what that represents in terms of these cycles of the four causal forces of birth, growth, decay, death, and the fifth of rebirth. Right? That's really what the zero and the center and what that centeredness is all talking about, is every breath ends in a new breath, right? So there are no endings, there's only new beginnings. And that's the key to all of, that's just beautiful stuff, you know, to really get the symbology of it all, to really understand it. All of these stories, all of these paintings, they're all talking about creation, right? All of it. And it all boils down to that in very simple terms. But again, it's like the facets I was talking about. You can show it as this graphic, but it's all talking about that one thing.
And as we talked earlier, for those who weren't part of our previous discussion, we were talking about a crystal having many facets, and as each of us represent facets, we actually combine together to form a divine crystal. So that's what Cosmic was referring to, as we had in a previous discussion before the meeting. Any more comments before I move on?
Every time I see, well, like the diagram with the golden age, Satya Yuga, I hope that we will also have, in this age, our own calendar, or you know, like if you look at the Egyptian or Mayan, everybody had like a really great calendar that represented the cycles. And I just don't think we have one right now. We're not aware of it, or you know what I mean? There is one, it's just we don't have it. We're not seeing it as well as they did in those times. You know,
what it is, Gisela, is that 1, the 440 tuning, 2, the Gregorian calendar, 3, the daylight savings, all these systems, really, we need to understand that those were installed for a reason, to take us out of that divine coherence with creation, right? And the moon cycles, really to get, that's all we need to do, again, is go back to the natural, and why the first principles are so important, right? Is to go back to honor that very first of the 8 phases over 27 days. Those 2 numbers are very important, and what those phases represent with the cubic structure, or it's all integral. But yeah, no, definitely the time part of it is critical, because again, the time part of it is where we're in the delusion part. The time part of it is the past future, because all of these dualities, when I'm talking about the mirrors and what the heart represents, the past and future are, neither of them are defined. What we do right now actually changes the you in the past, and it changes not just the you, it changes everything that's ever existed in your DNA. It changes your entire lineage, all the way around through the aliens into the future, because that's the nature of what this is we're just a slice in this. But what the now is all that's real, and everything else, that's what the 45 degrees really represents, and why the 90-degree phase conjugation is so important, is those 90-degree extents are past and future, good, bad, red, blue, all of these dualities. None of it is real, right? It's all just the very center. Like the green is the red, blue, which is the heart, right? Or the purple, because the purple is kind of what binds, and the green is in the center of the red and blue. But this is all numbers, right? It's all proportion, it's symmetry. That's what pi really represents, and proportion, that's what phi really represents, and scale, that's what Euler's E really represents, and what this really represents, right? Is the growth and decay. That's like the growth and decay rate is a logarithmic function. And that's really where that part of it, but those 3 universal constants are a core trinity, right? In everything that we're talking about.
Well, it's my wish that we will we will be closer to reality as we progress on our path, because we all have our way of understanding this. And I just think that yeah, it's going to happen in our time.
Yeah, it's already happening. And again, the stuff that I'm here, I can show you, like, the words suck because they don't. This is why the telephone game works the way it does. It's always the message it's always not what was intended. But when I can show you my geometry, right, this is where the key of what is and what law is like gravity's a law that it's not legislated and it doesn't need to be enforced. That's the nature of what I'm here to show is, and they're just very core principles. I don't pretend to know everything. I just know these very simple principles, but I can show you where phi and pi come from in the equilateral space of inscribed, circumscribed, which is irrefutable. Nobody can argue with it. We can talk about what it means, right? But as it relates to the core laws of geometry, and geometric law is where law of the air is coming in, is where the numbers are coming in. It holds ultimate dominion because this is what we're all going back to, is natural law, not this construct that we're in, but we need to understand what is the skeleton of Adam Kadmon, because that's the white magic, that's the white bone. The bone is the crystals, the piezoelectric. Everything outside of that is what we define, but that core structure is immutable, right? That core, that's what the 9, when I write NEYEN, really represents, is that structure, the bones. To really get what the bones, what the Skull and Bones secret society is about, and how it relates to maritime law, and how our monetary system and our legal system are both, they're perversions of divine intelligence, right? They're artificial intelligence they're not our birthright. And these very core principles that are first principle, that's what Sir Occam's razor is really all about, is the simplest solution is the optimal solution. And I don't know what that is. Again, I know where creation starts, right? And if we can all get to that space where we're starting from that perspective, right? Because it's really simple and it's really beautiful and it's musical. I think that what we build is going to be immaculate. And that's what we're here to do, is we're here to create Atlantis, but a new version of it for the next cycle of what that upper left is talking about, to come and decode, like we have what's been left for us to decode. And that's a big part of why I call myself a noetic archaeologist, is this is what I do, is these things are messages in bottles sent through time, right? To really get the time aspect of this is the person who created that through the creative capacity, their higher self really did that, and it's coded at fractal form with all levels of meaning for all levels of consciousness to look at it and get something from it, right? And again, it went through time to be here today to speak to us. That's the key of what synchronicity and coincidence and syncretism is really talking about, is everything that comes into your field of awareness within the now is speaking to you, right? It's trying to communicate, it's trying to do that infinity back and forth, what the breath really represents, and how the trees and the lungs are inverted relationships with each other, and what the tree of life and the tree of knowledge is all really speaking to, is what that infinity, that symbol really represents, and that flow. And again, this is water. This is why water is so important to all of it, right? Is it came before all of this. The water is that skeleton that holds the Akashic records of everything that's already all happened, right? And we're just here taking a slice of that trillions of times a second collectively together to experience it, to crystallize that experience into my geometry of my DNA, because that goes with me through these incarnation cycles, right? But the stuff that I accumulate stays here. But the experience that I have and the suffering that I go through and the transmutation of that suffering is the whole purpose of discomfort, right? Of not being in bliss which is our eternal birthright, but we do have to, I think, experience that. That's the whole point of incarnation, is that choosing, right? Of those two illusions, neither of them are real, but we're here. That's why one has to be split into two, is to choose. And through that choice, we experience and we grow, and I'll shut up.
No, thank you. That's a great, it really leads into a lot of the aspects we're going to talk about here. Any more comments before we move on to Bailey's work? All right, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and move on. So right now we're going to actually review from part one. This is the last topic we talked about, but I thought it was good to actually review this last portion of part one, because we were talking about astral forces. So this really has back to the idea of sex attraction and the ideas of polarities that Walter Russell talks about also, in terms of male, female, and the art of creation between the two. So the way we ended was, thirdly, the force of sex attraction. This is the pull from the physical plane and the swinging back of a type of involuntary energy onto the path of return. Hey, Doug, can you mute, please? It's not. The path of return. Cosmically speaking, it manifests as the attractive force. It manifests between spirit and matter, spiritually speaking. It is demonstrated as the activity of the soul, as it seeks to draw the lower self into full realization. This is what we're talking about, where we begin to change the polarities of the lower self and bring them into the higher self. These are some of the previous discussions that we've had. So we're trying to do this. So physically speaking, is the urge which tends to unite male and female for the purpose of procreation, for creating new life form. When man was purely animal, no sin was involved. When to this urge was added emotional desire, then sin crept in, and the purpose for which the urge manifested was perverted into satisfaction of desire. Now that the race is more mental and the force of mind is making itself felt in the human body, and even more serious situations apparent, which can only be safely worked out when the soul assumes control of its triple instrument. So again, this is where we're talking about this idea of the white magic. We're bringing the soul into the body to begin to regulate the ideas of the animal portion of man. As we begin to experience the mind more, bring that in, begin to actually understand what we're dealing with. So humanity is now at the midway point, which is where we're at in this Rule 8. We're on that idea between the water and the land. Man is swept by selfish desire and ambition. So I think we can all agree that man today is swept by this desire and ambition. For all of us have first-rate qualities. We're going to get a little bit more about what a first-rate quality is, because I think it's very important to actually understand as we go forward. He is racked by fear. So we're driven by selfish desire and ambition, and we're racked by fear, which the fear leads to the selfish desire and the ambition. His own family fears, national fears, and racial, for all of us, swing to the rhythm of the second ray. He is dominated by sex and by money, which is another manifestation of the energy of matter, and hence has a triple problem with which he is well equipped to deal through the medium of his triple vehicle and the triple potencies of his divine soul. Let us close the instruction on this note, well equipped to deal. We can overcome mental inertia and begin to function as souls in command of our environment. The soul is omniscient and omnipotent. So I just wanted to recover this because it's been a couple of weeks since we talked, to get back kind of into the concept of where we're going with the ebb and flow next. This really talked about how we as humans, right, as beings in this three-dimensional realm, as our personalities that we struggle with, are being driven by these selfish desires, by these fears. And to overcome that is not to get bigger guns or more guns or whatever. It is actually to begin to develop this soul self, to where we begin to have divine inspiration and begin to see the plans that are set forth for us to progress in the cycles that we're in. Any comments before I move on from this review of part 1? Okay, so the thing that we're going to talk about next is as we move into this next portion of this discussion, is that we're going to talk about the 7 rays. And one reason that I actually wanted to bring this up, this 7 rays of life, is this is one of the books that when Dr. Berlando was asked on the Alpha Vedic channel what he thought was some of the most important books to read to get a understanding moving forward, was this book, The 7 Rays of Life, that was put out by Alice Bailey. So I wanted to bring this up just to show that within this study, we could have studied the 7 rays of life, but the book that we chose was really to give us a clearer path. It's just not knowledge, but the Treatise on White Magic actually begins to incorporate the ideas of the 7 rays, but also gives us as initiates or as adepts an idea of the path and how to achieve this inner knowing, this divine essence, and the concepts of incorporation of the rays, and to begin to look at and understand how the rays affect our current existence. And so this again is the egoic lotus, which is from Theosophy, which has the different rays, which talk about, you know, what each ray is. It's a pictogram of the rays as the lotus, with the petals each identifying a different ray, the 7 rays. And then here is a kind of a more picture of the 7 rays. As we can see, each one has a different center. The color outside, the colors are basically the same, but the intensity of the colors changes, and the force within these colors changes, because each ray has sub-rays that then affect the body also. And then within that, it shows how these rays then come in to form this star, which is in the body, which is in the sacral chakra here. And it begins to work with the heart and the mind and goes up into the crown. But this isn't within Theosophy. The idea is that all these rays are rooted in the gut kind of purpose, and they form this star, and they form the 5 points, and they work together as they come in to the body. Any questions on the 7 rays so far, just this kind of overall concept of them? All right. So this is taken from the Theosophy Wiki. If anybody really wants to get kind of more into some of the concepts and things we are talking about here, the Theosophy Wiki is actually kind of the approved version within Theosophy of what these concepts mean and what they portray. So as you can see here, this is a table showing the first ray. So we have ray, we have principle, we have qualities of God and ideals of men. So qualities, this gets back to the physics of quality that Abraham Karim talks about, and the quality that also Walter Russell talks about. This is not quantity, this is quality. Quality cannot actually be measured except with divine intent. It cannot be measured by tools as within scientific materialism. So within this first ray, the qualities and gods of men are freedom. This is the qualities of God and ideals of men, is freedom. How does that translate into the expression in human affairs? It translates into government. Okay, so from freedom, this translates for men into government. Okay, so that's a kind of a tough concept to understand, but we have to understand that in order to have freedom, we actually have to understand and relate positively to governing forces, because it could be our elders, it could be a tribunal, it could be a council of peers, but within our structures, how do we function as free and sovereign beings and still be part of a communal nature that has some structure? Is all government bad? Probably not. There's probably good uses for having governing councils and so on to relate to other councils. But because the people that are involved with these councils, the people that actuate the governments, are driven by fear and desires and personalities, that we need to actually begin to develop the people. This is the way that it used to be done long ago. People were, picked out to be government. They, as we talked about earlier, it wasn't like within the Israelite idea when they chose their first king. They chose a fellow by the name of Saul, who was the tallest, the most handsome, and he looked like a king. He might have not have had any qualities of the king, but he had the expression of a king. And so the idea that maybe we need to begin to see how we as individuals can develop ourselves to function in a government, to function in a system that is beneficial rather than detrimental and self-serving. And this gets back to, one thing that I did see when we visited Music and Sky was a lot of attempts to create societies, intentional communities. And what happened was a lot of them failed. Many of them failed, even though they may have had a blueprint, like say, even with the Kins domain that Gabriel talks about within the Anastasia community, that some of those started and they failed because I think that they may get to the sticking point that it comes down to the people in the system, not so much the system itself. And so as we begin to see how we can actually begin to transmute individuals to become more of consciousness of freedom and how that translates to government, which is what we're talking about here, which is this first ray that Bailey's talking about, because the second ray, which is unity. So how do these two, freedom and unity, work together? Right? Are these dichotomies, freedom and unity? Or how does freedom and unity come together? Which then comes into philanthropy, right? So the love of man. How do these all work together? And how can we as individuals in this new consciousness bring this in through the soul to actually manifest these on our physical plane? It's a big concept, but this is what I really see is needed if we are going to have these societies that we think are not dystopian, but are utopian in a sense, but are the ideals, right? The qualities of God that we look for. And then we begin to look down here at the 7 human temperaments. So, within the first ray, we have power, will, courage, leadership, self-reliance, right? It's freedom. But we also have the government. So how does this self-reliance, leadership, and courage look with government? In the second ray, which we're talking about, universal love, wisdom, insight, intuition, philanthropy, sense of oneness, spiritual sympathy, cooperativeness. So how do we have all these work to achieve these qualities of God? Any comments before I move on to the next slide, which we're going to define a little bit more about the first ray? Yeah, go ahead, Cosmo.
Yeah, I just want to touch on like the geometric side of this in terms of centralization, right? And what government really means in terms of control and centralization, and how nature doesn't work that way. That the symbiosis aspect of what we're doing, right? The service to others, which gets into the philanthropy and where the unity comes in. But just again, trying to inject the how we look at information, that we can look at this stuff in geometric terms too. And that's all, just that other element of, again, because I really think that when we can share different ways of looking at things, we can enrich our perspectives of what we can take from them. And yeah, there's a lot here, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay. And I think there was one thing that Gabriel did talk about at Music and Sky when he was talking about trees. He did say there was a mother tree, right? And from the mother tree within the mycelium of the root structure and so on, that actually, so there was actually a hierarchical, almost governing structure where the mother tree would actually give up portions of itself to feed its children, right? And they all work together in a symbiotic manner. But it was also, within unity, but each one was entirely independent and different, but they work together. And so for me, a lot of it is, why do these systems, even though the system may be a very, beneficial system and look in its perfection, the system itself, again, it gets back to who's running the system, how is the system run, and how is the interplay between the individuals within freedom, within government, within unity. How does that play out? And is it a abstract of the system, or is it, taken as from the people that are actually part of the systems? So this was a first ray description I also pulled, and it says the first ray, the energy of will, purpose, or power, which is essentially the will of deity. So we're getting back to this God particle, this identity of the will of deity. This ray is such dynamic intensity that it's called the ray of the destroyer. Self-will run riot, right? I mean, you can have will go in many directions. We are told that there is no true first ray type incarnation, yet due to this potency. Perhaps the best example of the first ray's potency is found in the mineral kingdom, for radium is said to hold the key to the mystery of the first ray. Courage is also an aspect of the first ray, but true courage is not a fighting courage or any sort of struggle to be what is called brave. It is the courage of sure knowledge, of knowing, of sure knowledge, held steadily and without questioning in the midst of difficulty and discomfort. Right here, I pulled up this definition of radium just so that we could actually kind of look at what maybe radium was. So radium is a chemical element with the symbol Ra, Ra, and atomic number 88. It is the sixth element in group 2 of the periodic table, also known as the alkaline earth metals. So as we talk about radium, this is that definition of radium. So what is the higher expression of the first ray? As we talked about in the table, the science of statesmanship, of government. What is the lower expression? Modern diplomacy and politics. So as we have this manifestation in the first ray of this science of statesmanship and government, we as men, since our bodies are not in alignment with our soul purpose, but with the personality, we turn that into modern diplomacy and government. This is where we have the failures. We get into the politicking and the diplomacy rather than the statesmanship and the overall hierarchy. Perhaps the words of a great server can add a human dimension to the quality of a particular rays. Goethe, I think, touched upon the dynamic initiating power of the first ray when he said, "Whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now, and the courage of the first ray lies behind the Christ's promise. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." So anybody have any comments on the first ray structure or purpose or government or things that we've talked about to this point to actually begin to encompass this ebb and flow of the first wave that is part of this discussion?
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Sure.
In the table, the last column, it was about how it expresses in human affairs.
Correct.
Does it mean human created or things that affect the human experience?
I would say that freedom is a concept, right? It's a quality, right? Quality. This is the manifestation in the 3D.
Yeah, but is that government and also, for example, natural law by which we have to abide in this 3D realm, the law of cause and effect? Are these then also governments in this?
Well, again, when we look down
approach?
here, kind of like the human characteristics, right? We see power, will, courage, leadership, self-reliance. Right?
Yeah, but that's not that could also be an artificial overlay over the universal laws that already fit into place.
And I think that we can maybe turn back to what Cosmic was talking about. Is there any type of government in nature? And I would say, if we look at the mother tree, as a, I wouldn't call it a government, but I would say that there's a hierarchical structure in which there is decisions being made and a governance over the community being seen.
But it's autonomous.
And we also have accountability once we act in that freedom.
Yes.
Then we have to account to certain rules that are governing us.
Yes, and I think that that as community, right, to form unity, And again, these are big concepts, right? But to form unity, there usually needs to be some agreement on rules of conduct, right? I can't steal from my neighbor. I can't kill my neighbor. I mean, there are certain, which are natural laws that may be a form of this leadership, right? Which is when we get down to the second rays is universal love. So these second ray qualities, cooperativeness, spiritual sympathy, sense of oneness, right? The second ray qualities feed back into the first ray to actually form what kind of government it is that we would like to form, or what are the basis for this government and qualities. Because the idea that we are, free and self-reliant, I mean, as I said, how does self-reliance and unity, right? Those are almost dichotomies in a sense, because we are all self-reliant, but we are going to need something from our neighbor, right? We can't be 100% self-reliant. Not each person can. We are all facets of the crystal. We don't have all the pieces. Even within this group that we're talking about here, we are all free. We have unity, but we also have the idea that we have this cooperativeness, right? And as we get into this is, like I said, when we look at these systems, these different communities, whether it even be the, kin's domain that Gabriel talked about, they have failed. Why have they failed? The system looked right. We have a piece of land, 2.5 acres, where we should be self-reliant, but there is a community and sense of, wisdom and universal love that may not be being practiced. So even though the system of self-reliance seems to be apparently in good, but even within the family that's on the king's domain, we still need universal love, wisdom, insight, and a sense of government, right? I mean, a sense of the father, the mother, the children. How does that work? The elders, how does all that work? There is a hierarchical structure, and you can call it a government, an oversight system, but that's what this first ray brings in. But because it is a capacity of the will, that will can run riot. It can become self-will, right? Rather than a will of divine. And as we begin to change, right? As we begin to take this vehicle, which we call the human, which is the greatest antenna transmutation device ever created, how do we then bring this soul into this vessel to create the respondents and the frequencies and everything else that we need in order to project the divine purpose? How can we do that? And that's what this study is all about. The study is about how do we transmute this body through soul purpose into a higher form that we can no longer be based on fear, ambition, and these other aspects of the personality, to create a person who can function within the rays with the qualities and ideals into a 3D expression.
Reminds me also a little bit of, what is it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but then reversed. If you put it at the table upside down, and it's almost a pyramid of needs building up to the top.
It seems to me that the founders of the United States were making a rough draft attempt at accomplishing this.
And
waffled between the leadership aspects and the political, being a politician versus, and that's what our time is now to fix that.
And and we go through cycles. I mean, this is to understand that we're just going through cycles, and it can be fixed. And it's based, but again, to me, it's based on the people, right? The people are what manifest this. It's not that government is inherently evil. It's that the people that are in government may be driven by wrong desire, by self-will, by different aspects, because we've lost all the former knowledge of the Iroquois, right? The first peoples, we've lost that knowledge. It's been taken away from us. So that which was once in place, these ideas, I mean, there are stories of the Iroquois could come to a table and they wouldn't have to say anything, and they'd just look at each other, and they'd all get up knowing what their purpose is, because they were so connected by source, right?
That's
And
good.
and so how do we get back? Well, for some reason we've been programmed to forget all that, right?
Mm.
And it's all about political science, and it's about, learning and these different aspects, and more laws, because we don't enforce the ones we have, because we don't have the will to enforce the laws we do have.
Has been hijacked.
Yeah, and so the ideas is, is it the systems, or is it the people? Is it the consciousness? Like, we're going to talk a little bit as we move forward here about the different levels of Atlantis and Lemuria, and how they traveled through these cycles, and how their consciousness. This is a very big aspect of Steiner's work, which is theosophical work also. But to think that the earlier people had the same consciousness, body makeup, and abilities that we have today, Steiner would say that's not the way to look at. That's what we're being taught in history, that Cro-Magnon or whatever was a form of us that felt the same, that just wasn't developed as much. Steiner would say that it's more about the energetic levels, and this all gets back to the idea of the cosmic pulse, the energies that are coming in, the angels, the angles that we talked about earlier, that Cosmic was talking about, how they influence this current Earth, and how we relate to that energy that's coming in. And how do we view it, and what is our purpose, and what is our desire? Do we want to change, right? Do we want to grow into this next this incarnation of air? There are many who don't, right? They're going to fight and scream, and they're not going to want to go into the next thing. They want to stay either in the, the Piscean age, or in the land, the era of water, or the era of land. It's really based on, do we want to do this? And this is something that I talked about early on in the Russell studies, was that Walter Russell said that all men want to know God. And I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe that all men want to go on this journey to know God. If they did, we'd be in a much different place. And I asked Bear that same question. I said, Bear, do you believe this? And he said, well, not yet. And eventually all men will want to know God, but not all men maybe at this time want to know God.
All right. So we need to learn the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to this also in terms of your first graphic, and again, the infinity symbol, and to really key in again these core principles of what this is all about, and how every second has the four causal forces in it. It has a growth, or a birth, growth, decay, death. That consciousness itself is no different. So I like to analogize it with the day of the sunset and the sunrise. Consciousness rises and falls, right? That everything has to follow this process. And this particular realm is the twin star Sirius is coincident with that cycle of, and what Giza and all that's really about is that cycle of waking up and going to sleep. Is no different than the sun rising and falling, and there's no stopping it, right? This is all just processed through which quality and quantity they create music, because that's all that a pitch is quality is one number, quantity is another, and they have a relationship. And that relationship, when they're equal, is 45 degrees. And outside of that, it creates a hyperbolic curve. In one of those 90-degree quadrants of the four quadrants, it's all hyperbolic, but that relationship in that quadrant is where it all starts, because everything else is mirrors. But that relationship between quality and quantity is all of what this is about, and us getting into that aspect where we're moving into the quality side, which is heaven on earth, which is the feminine phase, because the feminine is the birthing process. And the quality is such that it takes the masculine phase that polarizes and it pulls it back to center and it rebirths it. Right. And so we're at that point right now. We're at that extremes of the masculine phase of polarization into the red, blue, and the green and the heart, which is the feminine, the Mari, the water, is about to it's that concept of waiting to exhale. The breath is the expansion. And we're at that point right now. We're at the extremes of polarization. We can't be divided any further, but this is all very critical and necessary for us again to choose, because we have to polarize to choose. And we're at that point in everything that you're talking about now. You know, yeah, everyone wants to know God, but you have to go through perhaps that transhumanist cycle and come back around again to ultimately get to that place. No, this time I want to know God. But it's all that process of what that infinity is, that constant refining process, right? That's evolution, and why love is in evolution backwards and revolve, right? Is that process of incarnation and cycle is always, you know, what the Ouroboros is talking about, the snake eating its own tail, is if you don't get anything done, you just rinse and repeat. If you get something done, you go out, and that's where the helix, the DNA comes in. If you really get something done, that's where the proportion of phi comes in, and you go out, out and out, right? To where you're not only through that helical fashion, but you're going through the vortex fashion, because that's really how what that infinity symbol is that evolving. Anyways, yeah, this is all just so profound to put in these really core first principles of why this is all here, what the breath of the compassion is, because that's that crystal, that's piezoelectricity. Everything that this is talking about is this process of the breath. That's all.
Okay, so we're going to any more comments before we move into the cycle of ebb and flow? We haven't even got into the text yet of cycle of ebb and flow. But
I know we're way behind, but I'm just amazed at the stuff that Cosmic keeps weaving into all of this, and it's like over my head, over my mind, but that's okay. I just need to listen and listen and listen.
But you can feel it.
There you go.
Right? Don't think it, because that the mind really, this is the problem. This is the prison.
I don't want to have it in my head. Yeah, I want it to go here.
Yeah.
So just keep talking, guy.
Yeah. And the words again are not it. Really, it's that it's so subtle, really, to get. And the words that I do choose is not me. I'm not doing this, right? This is, I'm trying to get out of the way of that higher aspect of myself. It's what's delivering these perspectives that I worked really hard. Really, that's what my process has been over 20 years is not learning as much as forgetting and learning what I don't know, not to know, right? But just letting go, and really that's what the water represents, is the flow, is getting in that state of the divine puts things in your now moment because everything is fractal in terms of meaning. That's what the 7 rays really mean, is everything has 7 levels. There's nothing that escapes that, right? And that's meaning too. That meaning it's fractal, and we just need to let go and stop being so
just jump in the middle.
Yeah, the insanity really is where it's at, people. That's the when you let go of the mind, you're insane. This is what Nikola Tesla spoke to, right? Is that this is really the secret, is just that's to be insane is where it's at. And it's not crazy. They're different concepts, like, you know, evil.
All right, so now we're going to get back into cycle, ebb and flow, as we've talked about the flow and the ebb of these cycles, because each of us go through it. And sometimes it's good to understand the cycle that we're in, so we can actually begin to see that some of these cycles are natural and they're what all people are going to go through. But to recognize it and to not think that you're insane as you're going through one aspect of this cycle is really important, because if you can understand that these cycles are natural and that you're going to go through these cycles in order to have growth, just as a flower or any plant would go through a cycle, we will too. And as we begin to lose petals, or so we can flower, but once we flower, we are going to go through a process of decay and for regrowth in the next season. So let us consider the words, the ebb and flow of the waters. In the understanding of the law of cycles, again, cycles, not circles, we gain knowledge of the underlying laws of evolution and come to a realization of the rhythmic, get back to the rhythmic, as we talked about earlier with sound and music, work of creation. Incidentally, also, we gain poise as we study our own life impulses, for they also have their ebb and flow and alternate between periods of light and periods of darkness. Just as we talked about earlier, the masculine and feminine principles of light and darkness, and how we need these two aspects in order to alternate and to have this ebb and flow. We have with us always that symbolic daily occurrence wherein the part of the world in which we live swings out into the clear light of the sun and later returns into the dark of the night. Our very familiarity with the phenomenon causes us to lose sight of its symbolic significance and to forget that under the great law, periods of light and of dark, of good and evil, of submergence and emergence, of progress into illumination, and apparently betrayal into apparently betrayal into darkness, characterize the growth of all forms. Distinguish the development of races and nations, and constitute the problem of the aspirant who has built for himself a picture of walking in a constant illumined condition and of leaving all dark places behind. So this is maybe a bit contrary to what some of the New Age thought would be, that we can only see the light, that we only live in the light, that we only have higher resonance at all times. What Bailey's saying is that we need these periods, just as we talked about earlier, as Cosmic was talking about earlier, that the day and the night, the body, the dark and the light, these are what build. Without the dark, if you put a plant in sun all the time, what would happen to it, right? It would burn out. I mean, it'd just burn up. It'd be too much. We need these periods of dark and light. Maybe the dark is seen as maybe a rest cycle in which we actually are reflecting on our shadow and things. And then the light is the growth cycles. But we need both aspects, both light and dark, to form the yin yang. Without the light and the dark, there would be no yin yang symbol. It would just be one white circle. So we need both these darks and light periods in our life in order to have the growth that's required for us to, expand our consciousness into our next existence. Any more comments on that before I move on to the next? Okay, so in these instructions, it is not possible for me to deal with the ebb and flow of the divine life as it manifests in the various kingdoms in nature. Again, this is Bailey talking about this, not me. These are her words. In nature and through the evolutionary growth of humanity, through experience in races, nations, and families. I seek, however, to elaborate somewhat the cyclical experience of a soul in incarnation, indicating the apparent ebb and flow of its unfoldment. The outstanding cycle for every soul is that of its forthgoing into incarnation and its returning back into the center from whence it came. According to the point of view, we will be understanding of this ebb and flow. Souls might esoterically be regarded as those seeking the light of experience, and therefore turn towards physical expression, and those seeking the light of understanding, and therefore retreat from the realm of human undertaking to forge their way inward into the soul consciousness, and so become dwellers in the light eternal. So these are those that would prefer the mystical life, going into the light only and foregoing the incarnation or the work on the earth. That is what this physical avatar is meant to do. So without appreciating the ebb and flow in the individual experience and are the tiny life correspondence to the great soul cycles. I think I missed something here. From the realm of human to forge their way into the soul consciousness and so become dwellers in the enlightened. Without appreciating the significance of the terms, the psychologists have sensed these cycles and call certain types extroverts and others introverts. These mark an ebb and flow in individual experience and are the teeny life correspondences to the great soul cycles. This passing into and passing out of the web of incarnated existence are the major cycles of any individual soul. And a study of the type of pralaya dealt with in the Secret Doctrine and a treatise on cosmic fire would be found of real value by the student. So what we're dealing with here is these soul cycles that, you know, as we consider people extroverts or introverts, really has to do with the cycles of their souls and how they're actually maybe be relating to their cosmic self or their soul consciousness and the world around them. And again, the idea is that the book, The Secret Doctrine, that was written by Blavatsky prior to, which was in the 1890s, I believe, came out close to 1900, and a treatise on cosmic fire, which was a prelude to this book by Bailey. She's suggesting that maybe if you really want to get into these concepts, you can read those books. There is also an ebb and flow in soul experience on any one plane, and this is the early stages of development will cover many lives. So this ebb and flow, what Bailey's saying is it covers many lives, that this reincarnation that we have of these soul cycles is really this process of coming and going through these cycles in many lives. They are usually quite extreme in their expression. A study of the racial ebb and flow will make this clearer. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the ideas of, in the Lemurian days, the flow of the outward going cycle spin itself on the physical plane, and the ebb carried the life aspect right back to the soul itself. There was no secondary ebb and flow on the astral or mental planes. So what she's saying here is that the Lemurian lifestyle, the Lemurian soul cycle, was different than our current cycle. That once the Lemurian went out of the cycle, it spun itself on the physical plane, and the ebb carried the life aspect right back to the soul itself. So the Lemurian cycle was a much shorter cycle than what our current existence cycle is. This gets back to the ideas of Steiner and his work, maybe moving, you know, Steiner got into moving through the planets and different eras and so on. So, you know, the Lemurians flow on the, so they didn't really go to the astral or mental planes. Later, the tide broke on the shores of the astral plane, though including the physical in less degree. The flow directed its attention to the emotional life, and the drift back to the center took no account of the mental life at all. This was at its height for humanity in the Atlantean days, and is true also of many today. So she's saying that, you know, as the ideas of how our soul cycled was different in Lemurian times than it was in Atlantean times, but today we still carry over much of the Atlantean aspects in many people today. Now the ebb and flow is increasingly inclusive, and the mental experience has its place so that all three aspects are swept by life of the soul. All are included in the outgoing energy of the incarnating soul. And for many lives and series of life, the cycle force spins itself. Within the aspirant, there arises an understanding of what is going on, and she awakens the desire to control consciously this ebb and flow, or, to put it in simple words, to turn the forces of the outgoing energy in any direction he chooses, or to withdraw to the center at will. He seeks to arrest this process of being swept out into incarnation without having any conscious purpose, and refuses to see the tide of his life beat out on emotional or mental spheres of existence, and then again see that life withdrawn without his conscious volition. He stands at the midway point and wants to control his own cycles, the ebb and flow, as he himself may determine it. With conscious purpose, he longs to walk in the dark places of incarnated existence with, let's see here, I gotta see the rest of this. Okay, so what this is saying is that as we stand on this midway point of the on this midway point, we begin to see, okay, so I'm gonna finish. Existence with equally conscious purpose, he seeks to withdraw into his own center. Hence, he becomes an aspirant. So what we're saying here is that this rule 8 that we're on, where we're standing in the middle between the water and the land, and now we have this choice that we can all make as to whether or not, we wish to have a series of to become this person that can control our ebb and flow. And how do we begin as humans consciously to control our ebb and flow? And Bailey's saying it's possible. Maybe some of us don't believe that may be possible. I don't know. But that Bailey's saying that it is our ideas that we can control our ebb and flow. Any comments on that, on the ability to control our ebb and flow?
I think we can, because as we have experience in life, we put ourselves more like in an observing position of certain things that we do. Then we realize that we don't always have to do something or be grabbed by this, and then I think we make better decisions. So then the flow, as you talk about, I think we get more control because we understand the cycles a bit better, or the energies of, let's say, the fall right now versus the winter versus the spring. You know what I mean? So I think so.
I'm always suspicious of the word control. I'm not sure we're in a place to be able to make those decisions wisely.
Well, and that's what we're trying to work on right now.
Making those decisions.
Well,
wisely.
because we are not making the decisions.
All right, that's what I mean.
The concept is that once we begin to develop the higher self, the soul self, the consciousness, the divine, these ideas of the control that we're doing are actually being inspired by divine will. That we may begin to seek that the concepts are not beneficial to divine purpose.
So we're in a position to be in control of deciding to let the divine will control.
Yes, but also
I resonate with that too, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I said I resonate with the idea of the notion of controlling, like me controlling. It doesn't resonate with me. I think I want to combine with this notion of surrender to the divine will, but not control. I mean, it's just the word is not kind of, it's maybe it's just semantic, but yeah.
So
I actually love that. I love that the way that goes, because and this is really important in a lot of our perspectives, is the inversion. To really get what inverted means, this is an inverse square law reality in terms of meaning, right? Is that control and flow are inverted. They're mirrors of each other. To get that true control is letting go, right? Is that's that flow process is, and where the cycle and the circle come in, and the only control you have in terms of letting go is a big part of control creates this, right? Whereas the letting go is where the cycles, there's not as much, the amplitude is reduced. And so the key to all of that is you're adhering to creation, right? Creation is the line, is no nothing. But that cycle part of it, this is kind of where the masculine comes in, and how Eve was created from the rib of Adam is that polarization is necessary to create the deviation from center line. And that's an important concept to get how the cycle and the circle are related in terms of binding is that binding is where the prime numbers come in, where that cycle gets all crazy, and it actually creates the two ends of the lines connect into a circle. But the cycle part of it is in the line, right? It doesn't have to be circular necessarily. but it is in the wave. That to get that concept that the wave and the circle are kind of the same thing. It's just that 180 degrees is top of the circle, and that's what creates this. But it's still, I don't know. It's kind of hard to put into words how the line and the circle they're one. The line, that's why I write masculine as I do, and feminine is, you cannot separate the circle and the line. And the ray that we started all this with, as it relates to the radius and Ra, and what the ray of light is really speaking to is so profoundly simple. Again, as it is speaking to all this.
I'm also seeing the Russellian vortex in and back out, and in and back out.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah,
same.
and that's that toroidal flow to get what past and future and how the hyperspace of the dielectric really works with that polarization, because that polarization is what connects it back to itself, right? But that polarization is it's kind of hard to really even conceptualize how creation happens out here, but it activates in the center, and how like what the heart really represents is that polarization creates a null in the center of a line. It creates a center that isn't really defined, right? And the same thing with geometry. When you create a space, it creates a null. That's where the feminine energies really act, right? That's that birthing space is within the center, but without that polarization, you can't create that. And that's what reality is all about, is it's a distortion of divine intelligence. That's what the egg fundamentally represents, that's what space is it's a separation of forever that has to be pulled apart for the waves to interfere within. But without that creation, or that, it's like a capacitor, right? Those two parallel plates. Without that separation, that's what creates the pressure for the waves to interfere within them. But that's all a musical concept, and the whole moon is that those are all the same thing. It's a capacitance and inductance is so important to get, how the music plays into all this stuff. It's but yeah, all of this is just so musical, and that's where I really can't wait for more people to see how this is all, chemistry, stoichiometry, all of it is music. Astrology, it's all music. And it's incredibly simple. The pitch, one number over another, meaning that's a tone, which is a geometry, which is sacred. It's just wow. Anyway.
All right. For now, we're going to stop. We've kind of reached where we'll start back in this cycle of ebb and flow in the life of the aspirant. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your comments. It's just been so enlightening, and it's just so great to go on journeys with all of you and get your ideas and to explore these topics. So with that being said, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with the Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, with the super Walter Russell's Secret of Light discussion group. Thank you all for your comments. Thank you for coming again and returning. We'll be meeting next week where we'll pick up on this topic. So for those who are watching, please like and subscribe and add your comments as to what we've talked about today. They are always so beneficial. And with that, we will begin to close out on this cycle, and we will see each other next week when we finish up with part 3 of Alice Bailey. They are so great. So thank you so much for what you've done, and thanks so much for all you. Yeah, you're so welcome.
Epic.
Right.
Love you all.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. We're still going to stay online for the group for recap. Thank you so much.